Psychic and physical relations. Having outlined certain features of the properties that vision in the fourth dimension should possess, we must endeavor to define more exactly what we know of the phenomena of that world. Again, making use of the experience of the two-dimensional being, we can put to ourselves the following question. Are all the phenomena of our world explicable from the point of view of physical laws? There are so many inexplicable phenomena around us that merely by being too familiar with them we cease to notice their inexplicability, and forgetting it, begin to classify these phenomena, give them names and include them with different systems. Finally, even beginning to deny their inexplicability. Strictly speaking, all is equally inexplicable. But we are accustomed to regard some orders of phenomena as more explicable and others as less explicable. We put the less explicable into a special group and create out of them a separate world, which is regarded as parallel to the explicable. This refers first of all to the so-called psychic world, that is to the world of ideas, images, and concepts which we regard as parallel to the physical world. Our relation to the psychic, the difference which exists for us between the physical and the psychic, shows that psychic phenomena should be assigned to the domain of the fourth dimension. The expression psychic phenomena is used here in its only possible sense of psychological or mental phenomena, that is those which constitute the subject of psychology. In spiritualist and theosophical literature the word psychic is used for the designation of supernormal or superphysical phenomena. In the history of human thought the relation to the psychic is similar to the relation of the plane being to the third dimension. Psychic phenomena are inexplicable on the physical plane, therefore are regarded as opposite to the physical. But their unity is vaguely felt and attempts are constantly made to interpret physical phenomena as a kind of psychic phenomena. This division of concepts is recognized to be unsuccessful, but there are no means for their unification either. In the first place, the psychic is regarded as quite separate from the body, as a function of the soul, not subject to any physical laws. The soul lives by itself and the body by itself, and the one is incommensurable with the other. This is the theory of naive dualism or spiritualism. The first attempt at an equally naive monism regarded the soul as a direct function of the body. It was then said that thought is a motion of matter, such was the famous formula of Moleschott. Both views led into blind alleys. The first, because the obvious interdependence of physiological and psychic processes cannot be disregarded. The second, because motion still remains motion and thought remains thought. The first view is analogous to the denial of the two-dimensional being of any physical reality in phenomena, which happen outside his plane. The second view is analogous to the attempt to consider as happening on a plane, phenomena that happen above it or outside of it. The next step is the hypothesis of a parallel plane on which all the inexplicable phenomena take place. But the theory of parallelism is a very dangerous thing. The plane being understands the third dimension when he begins to see that what he considered parallel to his plane may actually be at different distances from it. The idea of relief and perspective will then appear in his mind, then the world and things in it will take for him the same form as they have for us. We shall understand more correctly the relation between physical and psychic phenomena when we clearly understand that the psychic is not always parallel to the physical and in fact may be quite independent of it. Parallels, which are not always parallel, are evidently subject to laws that are incomprehensible for us, to laws of the world of four dimensions. It is often said that we know nothing about the exact nature of the relations between physical and psychic phenomena. The only thing we can affirm, and which is more or less established, is that for every psychic process, thought or sensation there is a corresponding physiological process which manifests itself in at least a feeble vibration of nerves and brain fiber, then in electrochemical changes within different tissues. Sensation is defined as the consciousness of change in the organs of sense. This change is a certain motion that is transmitted into brain centers, but in what way the motion is transformed into a feeling or a thought is not known. The question therefore arises, is it not possible to suppose that the physical is separated from the psychic by four-dimensional space, i.e. that a physiological process passing into the domain of the fourth dimension produces their effects that we call feeling or thought? On our plane, i.e. the world of motion and vibrations accessible to our observations, we are unable to understand or to determine thought. Exactly in the same way as the two-dimensional being on his plane is unable to understand or to determine the action of a lever, or the motion of a pair of wheels on an axle. At one time the ideas of E. Mach, expounded chiefly in his book Analysis of Sensations and Relations of the Physical to the Psychic, were in vogue. Mach denied any difference between the physical and the psychic. In his opinion, all dualism of the usual view of the world resulted from the metaphysical concept of the thing in itself, and from the concept, an erroneous one according to Mach, of the illusory character of our cognition of things. In Mach's opinion, we can perceive nothing imprecisely. Things are always exactly what they appear to be. The concept of illusion must disappear entirely. Elements of sensations are physical elements. What are called bodies are only complexes of elements of sensations. Light sensations, sound sensations, sensations of pressure, etc. Mental images are similar complexes of sensations. There exists no difference between the physical and the psychic. Both the one and the other are built up of the same elements of sensation. The molecular structure of bodies and atomic theory are accepted by Mach only as symbols, and he denies them in reality. In this way, according to Mach's theory, our psychic apparatus builds the physical world. A thing is only a complex of sensations. In speaking of the theories of Mach, it is necessary to remember that psychic apparatus builds only the forms of the world, i.e. makes the world such as we perceive it out of something else which we shall never attain. The blue of the sky is unreal, the green of the grass is also unreal. These colors belong to reflected light rays. But evidently there is something in the air of our atmosphere that makes it appear blue, just as the chlorophyll in grass refracts the color green. Without this last addition, a man might easily have said, on the basis of Mach's ideas, that this apple is a complex of my sensations, therefore it only seems to exist, but does not exist in reality. This would be wrong. The apple does exist and a man can in a most real way become convinced of it, but it is not what it appears to be in the three-dimensional world. The psychic, as opposed to the physical or three-dimensional, is very similar to what should exist in the fourth dimension, and we have every right to say that thought moves along the fourth dimension. No obstacles or distances exist for it. It penetrates impenetrable objects, visualizes the structure of atoms and quasars, calculates the chemical composition of stars, studies life on the bottom of the ocean, the customs and institutions of a race that disappeared tens of thousands of years ago, the logic of microprocessors. No walls, no physical conditions restrain our fantasy or our imagination. Morozov and his comrades flew in their imagination far beyond the bastions of Schlüsselburg. Morozov himself in his book, Revelation in Tempest and Thunderstorm, traveled through space and time when as he was reading Revelations in the Alexeyevsky Ravelin of the Petropavlovsky fortress. He saw thunderclouds scudding over the Isle of Patmos in the Greek archipelago, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 30th of September in the year 395. Do we not in sleep live in a fantastic fairy kingdom where everything is capable of transformation, where there is no stability belonging to the physical world? Where one man can become another or even two men at the same time, where the most improbable things look simple and natural. Where events occur in inverse order, from end to beginning, where we see the symbolical images of ideas and moods. Where we talk with the dead, fly through the air, pass through walls, are drowned or burnt, die and yet remain alive? All this taken together shows us that we have no need to think that the spirits that appear or fail to appear at spiritual seances must be the only possible beings of 4 dimensions. We may have very good reason for saying that we ourselves are beings of 4 dimensions, and are turned towards the 3rd dimension with only one of our sides, i.e. with only a small part of our being. This part of us lives in 3 dimensions and we are conscious only of this part as our body. The greater part of our being lives in the 4th dimension, but we are unconscious of this greater part of ourselves. Or it would be more true to say that we live in a 4-dimensional world, but are conscious of ourselves only in a 3-dimensional sense. This means that we live in one set of conditions, but imagine ourselves to be in another. The conclusion of psychology brings us to the same idea, but by a different road. Psychology comes, though very slowly, to the recognition of the possibility of a particular state, when it sees and feels itself in a real world having nothing in common with this world of things and phenomena. In a world of thoughts, mental images, and ideas. In discussing earlier the properties of the fourth dimension, it was mentioned that the tesseract, which is a to the power of 4, may be obtained by the movement of a cube through space on the condition that all points of the cube move. Consequently, if we suppose that from each point of the cube there is drawn a line which this movement must follow, the combination of these lines will then form the projection of a body of 4 dimensions. This body, that is the tesseract as was found before, can be regarded as an infinite number of cubes growing, as it were, out of the first cube. Let's try and look now for examples of such motion, which implies the motion of all points of the given object. Molecular motion, that is the motion of minute particles of matter that is increasingly being heated and lessened by cooling, is the most appropriate example of motion along the fourth dimension, in spite of all the erroneous ideas of physicists with regard to this motion. Professor Goldgammer notes that molecules are bodies, the linear section of which is something between 1/millionth and 1/10,000,000th part of a millimeter. It has been calculated that 1/1,000,000th part of a cubic millimeter of air, that is 1 cubic micron, at a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius and at an atmospheric pressure of 14 bar, contains about 30 million molecules of oxygen. Molecules move very fast. Thus, under normal conditions, the majority of molecules of oxygen have the velocity of about 450 meters per second. Molecules do not disperse in all directions instantaneously, in spite of their great velocities, only because they collide every moment with one another and because of this change the direction of their motion. Owing to this, the path of a molecule has the aspect of a very entangled zigzag, and a molecule actually marks time as it were on one spot. Leaving aside for the moment the entangled zigzag and the theory of colliding molecules or Brownian movement, we must try to find what results are produced by molecular motion in the visible world. In order to find an example of motion along the fourth dimension, we have to find a motion whereby the given body would actually move and not remain in one place, or in one state. Examining all the observable kinds of motion, we find that the expansion and contraction of bodies comes nearest to the indicated conditions. Expansion of gases, liquids, and solids means that the molecules retreat from one another. Contraction of solids, liquids, and gases means that the molecules approach one another. The distance between them diminishes. There is space here and there are distances. Is it not possible that this space lies in the fourth dimension? A movement in this space means that all the points of the given geometrical body, that is all the molecules of the given physical body, move. The figure resulting from the movement of a cube in space, when the cube expands or contracts, will have the form of a cube, and we can imagine it as an infinite number of cubes. Is it right to suppose that the assemblage of lines drawn from every point of a cube, interior as well as exterior, the lines along which the points approach one another or retreat from one another, constitutes the projection of a four-dimensional body? In order to answer this, it is necessary to determine what these lines are, and what this direction is. These lines connect all the points of the given body with its center. Consequently, the direction of the movement indicated will be from the center, along the radii. In investigating the paths of the movements of the points, or molecules of a body in the case of expansion and contraction, we find in them many interesting features. We cannot see the distance between molecules. We cannot see it in the case of solids, liquids, and gases because it is extremely small, and in the case of highly rarefied matter, as for instance that in Crookes tubes, where this distance is increased to proportions perceptible for us, or for our apparatus. We cannot see it because the particles themselves, the molecules, are too small to be accessible to our observation. When the pressure in Crookes tubes is reduced to 1/1,000,000th part of an atmosphere, 1 micron will then contain only 30 molecules of oxygen, and if they are luminous they can be photographed. A molecule, as a real quantity in relation to a physical body, can represent a point in relation to a geometric body. All bodies consist of molecules. Consequently, they possess a certain, though a very small, dimension of intermolecular space. Without this, we cannot conceive a real body, and can conceive only imaginary geometrical bodies. A real body consists of molecules and possesses a certain intermolecular space. This means that the difference between a cube of 3 dimensions, a to the power of 3, and a cube of 4 dimensions, a to the power of 4, will be that a cube of 4 dimensions consists of molecules, whereas a cube of only 3 dimensions in reality does not exist. It is only a projection of a 4-dimensional body in 3-dimensional space. In expanding or contracting, that is in moving along the 4th dimension, if the preceding arguments are admitted, a cube or sphere remains for us all the time a cube or sphere, changing only in size. Hinton quite rightly observed in one of his books that the passing of a cube of higher dimension transversely to our space would appear to us as a change in the properties of the matter of the cube before us. He also said that the idea of the 4th dimension ought to have arisen from the observation of a series of progressively growing or diminishing spheres or cubes. This last idea brings him quite close to the right definition of motion in the 4th dimension. One of the clearest and most comprehensible forms of motion in the 4th dimension in this sense is growth, the principle of which lies in expansion. It is not difficult to explain why it is so. Every motion, within the limits of 3-dimensional space, is at the same time a motion in time. Molecules or points of an expanding cube do not return to their former place on contraction. They trace a certain curve, returning, not to the point of time at which they started to expand, but to another. If we suppose that generally they do not return, the distance between them and the original point of time will continually increase. Let's imagine then, the internal motion of a body in the course of which its molecules or points, having retreated from one another, do not approach one another again, but the distance between them is filled instead with new molecules. These in their turn move asunder and make room for more new ones. Such an internal motion of a body would be its growth, at least a geometric scheme of its growth. If we compare a little green apple just formed from the ovary with a large red fruit, we shall realize that the molecules comprising the ovary could not create the apple while moving only in 3-dimensional space. They need in addition to this a continuous motion in time, a continuous deviation into space, which lies outside the 3-dimensional sphere. The apple is separated from the ovary by time. From this point of view, the apple represents 3 or 4 months' motion of molecules along the 4th dimension. If we imagine the whole of the way, from the ovary to the apple, we shall see the direction of the 4th dimension, that is the mysterious 4th perpendicular, the line perpendicular to all 3 perpendiculars of our space and parallel to none of them. On the whole, Hinton stands so close to the correct solution of the problem of the 4th dimension that he sometimes guesses the place of the 4th dimension in life, though he cannot determine this place exactly. Therefore he says that the symmetry of the structure of living organisms can be explained only in the movement of their particles along the 4th dimension. Everybody knows, says Hinton in his book, The 4th Dimension, 2nd edition, published in 1921, see pages 18 and 19. The means of obtaining on paper images resembling living insects. A few blots of ink splashed on a piece of paper and the sheet folded in two produce a very complicated symmetrical image, sometimes resembling a fantastic insect. If a whole series of these figures were seen by a man quite unacquainted with the method of their production, then thinking purely logically, he would have to conclude that they had originated from folding the paper in two, that their symmetrically disposed points have been in contact. In the same way, in examining and studying the structural forms of organized beings that very strongly resemble the figures on paper obtained by the above method, we may conclude that the symmetrical forms of insects, leaves, birds and other animals are produced by a process similar to this folding. We can explain the symmetrical structure of organized beings, if not by folding in two in 4-dimensional space, at any rate by a disposition in a manner similar to the folding of the smallest particles from which they are built up, through cell division. There exists in nature a very interesting phenomenon that gives us perfectly correct diagrams of the 4th dimension. It is only necessary to know how to read these illustrations. They are seen in the fantastically varied, but always symmetrical shapes of snowflakes, and in the designs of flowers, stars, ferns, and lacework that frost makes on window panes. Drops of water settling from the air onto a cold pane of glass, or onto the ice already formed upon it, begin instantaneously to freeze and expand, leaving traces of their motion along the 4th dimension in the shape of intricate designs. These frost drawings on window panes, as well as the designs of snowflakes, are figures of the fourth dimension, the mysterious a to the power of 4. The motion of a lower figure to obtain a higher one as imagined in geometry is here actually realized. The resulting figure, in effect, represents the trace left by the motion of the lower figure, because the frost preserves all the stages of the expansion of freezing drops of water. Forms of living bodies, living flowers, and living ferns are created according to the same principles, though in a more complex order. The outline of a tree gradually spreading into branches and twigs is, as it were, a diagram of the fourth dimension, or a to the fourth. Leafless trees in winter or early spring often present very complicated and extraordinarily interesting diagrams of the fourth dimension. We pass them without noticing because we think that a tree exists in three-dimensional space. Similar wonderful diagrams can be seen in the design of seaweed, flowers, young shoots, certain seeds, etc. Sometimes it is sufficient to magnify them a little in order to see the secrets of the great laboratory that are hidden from our eye.